Compromise was you couldn't give women who were HIV positive visiting prevention of maternal to child transmission clinics contraceptives. You had to promote abstinence only until marriage instead of comprehensive sexual health education. You had to denigrate prostitutes and sex workers in order to get money for US policy. Those were the compromises in order to get more money. Now, under the Obama administration, we've had a budget that came out with very vague language around abstinence only until marriage funding. Now, of course, through the work of advocates in Congress and elsewhere, we have gotten rid of, and we've seen a real gain in eliminating abstinence only until marriage programs. But we wanted to see much stronger leadership from the president himself, I believe, on that issue, and not watered down language out of the White House to begin with, and not to have a fight in Congress about it. Similarly, right away, when the stimulus bill came up, you saw it was predictable, a fight around abortion coming from the right, and almost dead silence from the White House and the administration until the fight was so out of hand that they were playing catch up, and they were doing so almost incoherently. And now in health reform, I think we have the same thing. Because we've had a push simultaneously for so-called common ground approach on abortion, which we're all not totally clear yet what that means, but which has meant that there's been an inclusion to a great degree of faith-based organizations in White House policies around pregnancy, abortion, marriage, et cetera. We've seen a couple of things. One is that automatically out of the box, the healthcare reform and abortion debate has turned to abortion neutrality. We're not going to talk about, we're not even going to go there with what happens with disparities between women's access to safe abortion in the United States by helping reform healthcare so that women of color and low-income women can get similar access as women of higher income to abortion. It's off the table. And that is something that, to me, when you talk about change and you talk about really putting evidence on the table, you enable that conversation to happen before it gets stopped. But when you put compromise and bipartisanship before the rights of people, you stop the conversation before it starts. And so why I say orders of magnitude different, I've seen a pattern, from my perspective again, of wanting to compromise and knowing that compromise will come from putting off to the side the most difficult things to talk about. And what we really need is the president as candidate, the president as person who's willing to go out and say, you know what, this issue's off the table because we do believe in equity of access. We do believe it's a legal right to abortion, and we do believe that women, this needs to be on the table as a debate rather than taking it off the table immediately. Amanda had a panel earlier where folks talked about the difference in the progressive community of recognizing women's voices and feminist voices in the blogosphere. And even in the progressive community, we still have that challenge of getting women's and feminist perspectives recognized. Even in the Democratic Party and the progressive movement, we still have the challenge of getting reproductive rights, women's rights to access to contraception and abortion recognized as key fundamental challenges and not as something over there that can be kicked off the table as easily as that. And I'll stop just by saying one thing. I'm troubled by the fact that today, I've been doing a little bit of exploration of what's happened with the language around recent domestic terrorist events. If you look at the language statements out of the White House around the murder, for example, of the security guard in the Holocaust Museum, vastly different than what came out of the White House around the murder of Dr. Tiller. If you look at the FBI's response, vastly different than what happened with the murder of Dr. Tiller. If you look at what's happening today, Dr. Carhart, who's one of the few physicians now still able to perform late-term abortions with the expertise that he has, no federal marshal protection, despite the fact that he is now being targeted by many of the same groups that decried publicly the killing of Dr. Tiller, but supported violent language up until he was murdered. So I think we need a very strong voice from the White House and the administration talking about these issues as being fundamental and profound to women and their rights, and not always sidelining them, because the more you sideline them, the more they become radioactive and the more they get sidelined.